Welcome back to the Crypto Maniac. We've got a lot to talk about, and there's so much going on in the space that it's almost hard to know where to begin. But perhaps a good place to start is with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Now, there's been a ton of coverage, of course, with Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and the whole battle that's going on. So instead of just regurgitating everything that's been going on in the news right now, I thought it might be good to talk about a couple of things that underlie that whole argument, just to kind of give us a little bit more perspective on that whole situation. So immediately, one of the things that comes to mind is the marshmallow experiment, which is made famous from the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And if you're not familiar with the marshmallow experiment, it's a really interesting delve into psychology, because it effectively takes a whole bunch of people, I think they were children for the most part, and offers them something now, like a marshmallow, or if they wait for 15 minutes or whatever allotted period of time, because this has always been redone with different things and different people, then they get a reward of 2 snacks or 2 treats instead. And so the idea is to sort of see who is going to take the instant gratification versus being able to wait and be able to get more for that later. So amazingly, there are people out there who just don't understand the idea that if they wait, that there is a bigger payoff, especially when it's guaranteed in a situation like that. So what the hell does the marshmallow experiment have to do with Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash? Well, one of the things that I think is most interesting about that whole debate is something that I see as just ridiculously obvious. And that is that the infighting in the community is what keeps mass adoption from actually coming, or it definitely delays it at the very least, right? So the irony in the whole thing is that the community as a whole really wants Bitcoin to reach the masses, right? And that's going to bring all of us up together, right? The only problem with that, of course, is that once there's greed or infighting from different factions that form off, is that everything gets grinded to a halt, and then the masses on the outside looking in just see this kind of turmoil, and of course they don't want to touch it because there is that element of some uncertainty. So there are so many different pieces to this argument that it's hard to just boil down to that one thing. And I definitely agree that, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides. So on the one hand, obviously, Bitcoin as it stands, as it should be, as it was meant to be, is decentralized. And as such, everybody has a voice. And if everybody has a voice, then people are free and should be free to just faction off as they please with the ideals that they have interpreted to be Satoshi Nakamoto's original vision. Now, the advantage to having something centralized is that even if not everyone agrees, we go in one unified direction. But that's not what Bitcoin is all about. So the problem, though, is that something like Bitcoin Cash, I think for a lot of people, whether it's 8 megabytes, whether it's a SegWit 2x situation with a 2 megabyte block, or whether it's got SegWit where you can scratch out the digital signatures, whether you fill the block with banana coconut cream, doesn't really matter. But the biggest problem, I think, with the ideology behind something like Bitcoin Cash is the problem of at least the appearance of manipulation. So guys like Roger Ver and Bitmain Jihan Wu, it smells and tastes a little bit funny, whatever it is that's going on in the background. And so I think that is a major put off at the moment. One thing that I will say for Bitcoin Cash is that I do admire the fact that the community has chosen to go forward with a decision that will effectively go ahead and try to solve the scaling issue, which has been plaguing Bitcoin now for years, quite literally. So not a bad thing, all things considered. Perhaps the way they're going about everything, again, looks and smells a little bit strange. But the push to actually find a new solution is important. And does Bitcoin actually have value if it doesn't have its purpose anymore? So the whole argument that Bitcoin as a store of value can only go on so long, because there are things like Dash, which has been killing it lately, Litecoin, that actually do effectively what Bitcoin is supposed to do, only much faster and much more efficiency. People can argue with me on that point if they wish to. But in the meantime, Bitcoin Cash is also a good candidate for that. And so the problem with Bitcoin at the moment is its own stagnation. Now, we can have this same argument with Ethereum as well, as companies like, cryptos like Neo start to really nip at the heels of Ethereum and EOS in particular. Dan Larimer and his project with EOS are proposing to do Ethereum better than Ethereum. So that is one of those things as well. Now, it'll take a little while to roll out EOS as that comes up, but that's something to be considered as well. At the same time, there's something to be said for taking your time and doing something right. But of course, the other side of that coin is you don't want to become stagnant to the point where your next runner-up is about to overtake you. So Ethereum, for example, they have their head, I don't want to say buried in the sand to give the connotation that they're just not paying attention to what's going on around them, because I think they're fully aware. But the thing about them is that they are prepared to not roll out something too quickly in the hope of getting it right. And so that is always the balance to try to fly, is finding the solutions and finding them quick enough, but also taking enough time to make sure that it's just goddamn done right. And I think that's what's going on in the Bitcoin camp at the moment. So there's a real push to just solve this debate already, now that we're getting threats of CME futures coming in, which ultimately would be a great thing, but we'll circle back to that in a little while. I think there's something important to consider there as well. So in the meantime, the cryptocurrency space, as pertains to specifically Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, but also spreads out over to Ethereum and Neo and whatever else your crypto beliefs are, turns into this effect of effectively religious belief. And so there are people that are just intrinsically, they feel this thing from inside where they just absolutely believe in the project of Bitcoin Cash. And then others who are on the other side of that line, which is Bitcoin Core. So I think it's important to sort of just be able to step back from the situation and be able to reanalyze these things a little more logically rather than with our hearts. And of course, there's that whole thing about not trading irrationally in some respect and looking at the analyticals just for what they are. So as a straight ahead investment, I think that's really important, but there is also this underlying technology that does really give us promise of a brighter future. And so, I mean, that is worth a ton. And I think that's probably where some of the line gets drawn in the sand. But in my mind right now, the biggest line that's being drawn in the sand revolves around money. And I think that is a really poisonous argument to be having right now. And that is where the whole thing has the potential to just implode on itself. And just to circle back to the beginning of this rant that I'm kind of going on right now, this whole tirade, is that it is ironic, this whole infighting, because where we could all go up and profit together, with this infighting, it's almost like children pulling at the same toy. Eventually, they're just going to pull it apart and it's not going to be good for anybody. And so what can we do about all that? Well, it's pretty hard to compete financially against those players that have that kind of dominance in the space. And so I can't even imagine what it costs to spam the mempool the way that they did last week as the price of Bitcoin Cash went up to 2,500 beans per Bitcoin Cash. Is pretty crazy. But it's good to see that the unified effort has not gone through. That said, we're only a week away from that whole happening, so that we're not even a week away yet. So, I mean, I don't think that that threat is necessarily, we're not out of the woods just yet, I would say. So, from a financial point of view, I don't know, it's different for everybody, of course, but to try to hedge against these kinds of threats, if you've already got your Bitcoin Cash, it might still be worth actually holding on to that, because realistically, what if the table does actually turn the other side? And so therefore, I've also got Neo and I've also got some EOS as well. But we can talk about some strategies to play those in a way that is a little bit more cost effective to hedge your bets in the future, just in the event that something does turn so drastically in that way. Now, it's hard to foresee right now that that would actually happen, but that is always a possibility, and we've seen that in traditional markets up until now, of course, and there's no reason why that couldn't continue on into the future. Now, just to end out this whole argument about Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, I think there are a couple of last points to sort of go over, and one of them is, in my mind, something like Bitcoin Cash. One of the reasons why it's a little bit smelly, for me anyway, is that when you watch the charts of everything go by, so in the times, of course, where there's a fork coming up and people are promised free cash from that new fork that's going to split off into its own chain, That's a little bit of a different situation because people are stacking Bitcoin with the promise of actually getting that effectively free money. So that's a little bit of a different situation where when Bitcoin comes up, it just takes all of the gas out of all of the altcoin market, right? So we've got this sort of a thing where Bitcoin rises and all of the alts deflate, and man, that's really hard to see because they go down a lot in a day. So that aside, in a normal quote unquote situation where Bitcoin comes up in value, then the alt market tends to follow. Now, in my mind, what tends to be a little bit stinky for me is that when Bitcoin goes down and it brings some of the alt market with it, then Bitcoin Cash seems to go up. And so you'll see this convergent, divergent pattern sort of form when you're looking at the charts. Now here's a chart showing Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash per minute, and you'll see that pattern is super clear and is almost all the time exactly following this trend. So make of that what you will. Now, the topic of mass adoption has become a very interesting and juicy topic in the last little while, and just for fun, I think it's kind of interesting to take something like Google Trends and have a look at Bitcoin and Bitcoin searches globally. Here we see the correlation over the last 12 months of the interest of Bitcoin over time, and it is quite interesting. But also, just as a side note here, look at this. Number one, Africa, South America, Europe, back to Africa. Anyway, moving on, here you can also see some specific topics that people have been searching over the last 12 months, but just for fun, something in pop culture, like just first thing here, let's say this. Okay, interesting. Okay, I don't really know that much about Taylor Swift, but here maybe there was an album release or something like that. But in my mind, pretty interesting to see that Bitcoin is able to, by and large, outperform a search query like Taylor Swift somehow. So I would have thought that Taylor Swift must be a ton more popular than something like Bitcoin. But I have noticed in my own Facebook circle, people have started to ask their own network. So these are either acquaintances or people that have just like, we've collected each other, we've never actually met somehow because Facebook appears to be getting a little bit less personal anyway. But it's really interesting to see people reach out to their own network and not being so shy or afraid to be publicly ridiculed for asking questions about their own interest in Bitcoin. So I think that in itself is a really good indicator. Now, as everything grows, it gets a little bit more and more out of hand. These forks that have been coming down the line are a little bit crazy. So this whole on again, off again relationship, for example, with the SegWit 2X camp, it was officially called off. That was huge news. And now suddenly it's back. But wait a second, they can't get it together because somehow the code hasn't allowed for a block to be mined any more than 1 megabyte still. So for whatever reason, that's also been delayed, but is apparently still on. So what's going on there? We'll have to wait and kind of see what's happening. But in the meantime, there's Bitcoin Gold that sprung up, and I'm gonna try to push out a video that actually shows you how to get your Bitcoin Gold if you've held it on, let's say very specifically, on a Ledger hardware wallet. So look out for that coming up. But in the meantime, Bitcoin Silver is on the books. There's Bitcoin Diamond that's also coming up. There's Bitcoin Cash Plus. There's Bitcoin Classic that just happened as Bitcoin Classic forked off, so Bitcoin Cash and Classic turns into Bitcoin Classic. Super clever. But anyway, so that's a little bit silly, maybe, but is also maybe just free money, but also just serves to just add noise to otherwise a ship that should just be goddamn going forward. Now, lastly, I promised to circle back to the whole CME futures thing that we've been talking about. Now, everybody is super excited because of some of the press that's been coming out, and it's been coming out from all possible sources, which is great. And we're all busy high-fiving each other, which is fabulous, but I'm a little bit skeptical until it actually happens. That's not to say that I don't think it's gonna happen, but the deadline was given, or the promise date was given, that hopefully these will be in place by the second week of December. Now, that's coming up in a screaming hurry, so there's not that much time. In fact, that's about a month from now, 4 weeks, maybe even 3, but that'd probably be pushing it. So there's been a ton of backlash to come out from the Wall Street crowd, and they're a little bit threatened, right? And we've all seen the effects of big heads like Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase. And Bitcoin is still a bit of a delicate flower in the sense that as soon as some bigwig says something negative, it just takes a tumble. And so the power given to some of these people who really don't have anything to do with Bitcoin or shouldn't have anything to do with Bitcoin still are able to really affect the price. So my point being is that be careful, because as soon as we have a promise of something, everybody clamors over each other to try to get more Bitcoin first. The problem is that sends the price skyrocketing. The downside to that is if there is some kind of a delay for any of the other Wall Street people on the scene who are crying that no, this needs to be either just put in a box and shelved indefinitely or at least delayed, then that could have a major impact on Bitcoin's price going forward. So watch out for that. Yes, I'm excited just like everybody else because that could really open the floodgates, but at the same time, if there's any issue with that, and typically this is not a simple thing to put in place, so typically when these difficult things come into play, they do tend to get pushed back. And if that tends to get pushed back and things are not on schedule or there's some kind of a problem, then that can definitely result in drastic price moves to the downside. That said, I'm still wildly bullish on Bitcoin. I love my Bitcoin. I can't wait for it to break through 10,000 just like everybody else. And lastly, today is Friday and we haven't seen a major market downturn. Now it's coming down a little bit right now as I kind of look. So right now, it's actually kind of spilling off the edge a little more than I'd like it to be, but I'm still hopeful going into the weekend that that hopefully we'll come out the other side in plus territory instead of just always going down on a Friday. But who knows? Next week is another week. But anyway, thank you so much for joining Poppy and myself, who's come in to also say hello. Let me know what your thoughts are about Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. What do you see as the main driver forward? Do you think that my comments are maybe even a little bit unfair? I don't know. I mean, there's so many different sides to it. I'd really be interested to hear your point of view. And also, what are your thoughts on the whole CME futures thing coming in? Let me know in the comments below, and I'd definitely love to have a bit of a conversation with you. And again, look out for the video on Bitcoin Gold and how to actually claim that off of your ledger. And if you'd like to make a generous donation, there are some links below, but even a like or share goes a long way. So thanks so much for joining me here today, and we'll see you next time.